It all started so simply, so normally. At first, I didn't see the danger. But looking back now, I can't help but wonder, was I always destined to ask myself that one question? Does size really matter? It feels like a lifetime ago now, but I remember it so clearly, the early days with David. We were like any other couple, I guess. We didn't rush into anything. There was no whirlwind romance or dramatic love story. Just two people who met, connected, and grew into something deeper. Something real. David wasn't flashy. He didn't have the bold charm some men do, the kind that pulls you in with their confidence. He wasn't tall, dark, and mysterious. He wasn't even the life of the party. He was steady, quiet, and maybe that's what I needed, the calm to my chaos. We didn't have what people called sparks or fireworks, at least not in the way movies show it. But what we had was something stronger, something steady. Love. Trust. It was simple, but it was enough. When it came to our physical relationship, I never once questioned it. David was good to me, loving, attentive, patient. We never had fireworks in bed, but I didn't need them. Everything felt just right. The way he touched me, the way he held me, the way our bodies fit together, it worked. It wasn't about size. It was about connection. It was about him. Us. But then the whisper started. It wasn't immediate. I didn't realize at first. It was a comment here, a joke there, tossed out casually by my friends. At first, I just laughed it off. Who cares about that stuff? I told myself. But the more I heard it, the more it lingered in the back of my mind. I remember the first time Laura brought it up. We were sitting at our usual spot in the cafe, sipping our drinks, talking about life. As usual, I thought I had everything figured out. Then, with a sly smile, Laura casually dropped it. You know, she said, size really matters, don't you? I mean, it's not everything, but it does make a difference. I was taken aback. I must have looked confused because she quickly added, I just mean in bed. I can't imagine being with someone who's, well, you know, lacking in that department. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. Laura always had a way of saying things just to get a rise out of me. But something about her words stayed with me. Was it really true? Did it matter? I pushed it aside at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it started to gnaw at me. At first, I tried to brush it off. David was everything I needed. But then, as I spent more time with my friends, I noticed how often the topic of size came up. Not just Laura, but others too. Passing comments, subtle looks, conversations I had never been part of before. It was as if everyone had the secret, and I was the only one who didn't know. I wasn't naive. I knew there was more to a relationship than just the physical side. But the more I listened to these women, the more I began to doubt. What if there was more to it? Was David enough? Was I missing something? I started to wonder. Had I been settling for something I didn't even know was lacking? It wasn't that David wasn't satisfying, far from it. He was caring, he was loving. But the idea that maybe, just maybe, something could be better kept creeping in. I tried to ignore it, but the seed had been planted, and like any seed, it began to grow. The more I thought about it, the more it consumed me. Could I truly be happy without knowing if size really mattered? Could I live with these doubts in my head forever? It was that question, does size really matter, that began to haunt me. And so, with hesitation and a little guilt, I made a choice. But like everything else in this story, it wasn't as simple as it seemed. If you're curious about what happens next, about the temptations, the choices, and the consequences, and complications, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel. The whispers didn't stop with Laura. Once that seed of doubt was planted, it spread quickly, like wildfire, taking root in places I never thought it could. Every conversation, every casual remark seemed to bring me back to the same question. Does size really matter? At first, I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself that these were just casual conversations, that people didn't actually believe what they were saying. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to weigh on me. It was like every woman I knew had a secret they weren't telling me, some unspoken rule about intimacy that I was missing out on. I remember a few weeks after the cafe conversation with Laura, I was out with another friend, Jennifer. We were at dinner, laughing about life's little absurdities, when she casually mentioned something I wasn't prepared for. Oh, I swear if my husband's, equipment wasn't up to par, I'd be in trouble, she said, eyes twinkling with that look of mischief. I mean, it's not everything, but it definitely makes a difference, doesn't it? I froze. It wasn't like Jennifer to talk so openly about her marriage, especially in public. But there it was, another woman, another comment about size. It was everywhere. Jennifer, I don't know what you're talking about, I managed to say, trying to act casual, but I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort in my chest. She grinned, clearly amused by my reaction. Oh, come on. You know what I mean. There's a certain level of satisfaction that comes with knowing your partner has what it takes. It just makes everything better. Trust me. I laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to say. But as we continued our conversation, all I could think about was the question that kept echoing in my mind. Was my husband David enough? Did size really matter? After that night, it became even harder to ignore. Every time I went out with friends, I could sense it. The unspoken comparison, the hushed references to intimacy, the subtle comments. Even women I hardly knew had something to say about it. I started to feel like I was the odd one out. While everyone else seemed to have some secret knowledge about what was good in bed, I was left wondering if I was missing something. I loved David. There was no question about that, but how could I know if I had everything I needed if I never explored the alternatives? As the weeks went on, I became more and more obsessed with the thought. It wasn't just the comments from my friends. It was the way they acted about it, like it was something so crucial that I had to pay attention to it, too. I had to wonder if I was being naive, if I was missing out on something that everyone else seemed to have figured out. The thoughts wouldn't go away. I could hear the voices in my head, telling me to ask the question, to explore, to find out for myself. It became impossible to ignore. What if all those women were right? What if size was the key to something I hadn't experienced? I felt ashamed, guilty even for entertaining such thoughts. But there was something inside me, something that yearned to know, to satisfy this strange curiosity. I wasn't unhappy with David. Not at all. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was holding myself back from something. Something that could be better. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to tell myself that I was overreacting. But the more I told myself that, the stronger the temptation became. It was a slow burn, a pull I couldn't resist. It wasn't just the physical aspect, it was about proving something to myself. I wanted to know if there was a truth to what everyone else was saying. If size really did make a difference. I started to research it. I read articles, listened to podcasts, talked to women who had the nerve to admit their experiences. And slowly, very slowly, I began to think about what I could do to find out. One evening, while David was working late, I found myself scrolling through online dating apps, something I never thought I would do. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but the idea of meeting someone different, someone who might show me something I had been missing, seemed so tempting. I told myself I was just curious. It was harmless. I wasn't planning to do anything with it, just window shopping, so to speak. But as I swiped through profiles, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement building up in me. It was thrilling, in a way, knowing that I was exploring something new, something David didn't know about. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of something. That night I created a profile. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, or even what I would do if someone responded. But the idea of knowing began to consume me. I had to know. It's strange, isn't it? How something so small, so seemingly insignificant, can grow into an obsession. How a passing comment, a casual joke, can become something bigger, something impossible to ignore. It's like a fire that starts with a single spark, and before you know it, it consumes everything in its path. The more I thought about it, the more it took over my mind. The question, does size really matter, kept echoing in my thoughts, refusing to let me go. I couldn't shake it. It was there when I woke up, when I went to bed, and even during moments when I should have been fully present with David. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch, no matter how hard I tried. I had never been the type of woman to entertain such ideas. I was always the one who believed love wasn't about physical perfection. But something had shifted, and now I wasn't so sure. David and I were doing fine, weren't we? We had a loving, stable marriage. He was everything I needed in a partner, patient, supportive kind. But these thoughts, these whispers that started as little cracks, were beginning to break apart the solid foundation of my certainty. And that was when I realized I had to know for myself. I wasn't going to ask David. That much was clear. I couldn't imagine looking him in the eyes and asking him a question like that. It wasn't fair to him, and I knew it. This wasn't about him, it was about me. I didn't need to go looking for a new relationship. But something inside me, a deep, curious urge, pushed me further down a path I wasn't sure I could turn back from. I began to think about the men I knew, about the ones I'd met in passing. I thought about their confidence, the way they carried themselves. What if one of them was different? What if they could show me something I didn't even know I was missing? So I did something I never thought I would do. I downloaded a dating app. It felt like stepping into a world I didn't belong to, one that didn't align with the life I had built with David. But there was something intoxicating about it, the anonymity, the excitement of the unknown. I wasn't looking for love. I wasn't looking for a long-term commitment. But the idea of exploring something forbidden, something exciting, had become irresistible. I remember the first time I saw his profile. He wasn't exactly my type, not the kind of guy I would usually go for. But there was something about him. Something in the way he smiled, in the confidence that oozed from every word he typed. His messages were smooth, flirtatious, and it didn't take long before we were exchanging texts, more intimate, more suggestive. His name was Mark, and somehow, through the exchange of a few innocent messages, he made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Something electric, something thrilling. We didn't talk about size. We didn't need to. There was an unspoken understanding between us, something that made me feel like we were already on the same page. It was crazy. It was reckless. But I couldn't stop. The curiosity, the temptation, was like a drug, and I was addicted. I told myself I was just having fun, that I wasn't doing anything wrong. After all, I wasn't doing anything physical. Not yet, anyway. But even as I typed out messages, even as I flirted with Mark, there was a voice in the back of my mind that told me I was crossing a line. I felt guilty. Was I betraying David? I asked myself over and over. But then, a moment later, the guilt would fade, replaced by the excitement, the rush of knowing I was stepping into uncharted territory. It wasn't real yet. It was just words on a screen. But for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. Mark and I continued texting for days, each conversation more intense than the last. The excitement, the anticipation was building. And the more he teased me, the more I wanted to know what it would feel like to have someone else's hands on me, someone who wasn't David. The physical side of it seemed almost secondary. What I craved was the newness, the thrill of something unknown. One night, after a particularly flirty exchange, Mark suggested we meet. I hesitated, my heart racing as I read the message. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to stay faithful, stay loyal. But the other part, the part that had been craving excitement for so long, pushed me to agree. We set a time, a place. A quiet cafe, where we could talk, where we could meet face to face. Just to talk at first. I told myself that. Just to see what it felt like to be around someone who wasn't David. Someone who could make me feel alive in a way that had nothing to do with the life I'd built. The day of the meeting, my stomach was a mess of nerves. I felt guilty. I felt sick. But I couldn't back out now. This was something I had to do for myself. I needed to know. I arrived early, sitting in the dimly lit corner of the cafe, feeling like everyone could see through me, could see what I was about to do. I tried to calm my nerves by sipping my coffee, but it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something I couldn't undo. When he walked in, my heart skipped a beat. Mark wasn't what I expected. He wasn't some model or some smooth-talking playboy. He was ordinary in a way, but there was something magnetic about him. The way he carried himself, the way his eyes locked onto mine as he approached my table. We talked for hours. It was strange. The connection between us felt so immediate, so intense. I couldn't deny it. I was drawn to him. And as the night wore on, I began to wonder what it would be like to go farther, to cross that line, to see what this new world could offer. But even as I sat there, as I felt the pull toward him, I couldn't shake the guilt, the thought of David, waiting at home. It was like two worlds were colliding inside me, and I didn't know how to reconcile them. I didn't know how far I would go, but I couldn't stop wondering what would happen if I took the next step. That night in the cafe, everything felt like it was happening too fast. Yet somehow, it felt like it was happening exactly as it should. I wasn't sure what I had expected, but Mark was nothing like I imagined. He wasn't the type of man I usually went for. He didn't have the polished look, the expensive clothes, or the kind of charm I associated with someone desirable. But there was something raw about him, something genuine, and in that moment I couldn't ignore it. He had a way about him, a way of making me feel seen, making me feel important, like I was the only woman in the room. He made me laugh effortlessly, made me forget about everything else. My guilt, my confusion, my doubts, everything melted away as we talked, as we connected. It wasn't just the physical attraction. I know that sounds cliché, but it's the truth. Mark made me feel desired in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about size. It was about attention, about someone noticing me in ways that David didn't. I didn't realize how much I missed that feeling until Mark brought it back. When the evening started to wind down, I felt the pull between us growing stronger. There was a tension, an unspoken understanding that this night didn't have to end here. The thought of going home, of walking back into my life with David, felt more suffocating than ever before. I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I stayed, if I let myself explore what I was feeling. But as we got up to leave, reality came crashing down. I couldn't do it. Not yet. I couldn't just walk away from everything. Not for some fleeting desire, not for the rush of excitement I felt in the moment. I can't, I said, my voice trembling as I pulled back from the temptation. I'm married. I can't do this. Mark looked at me, his eyes intense but understanding. He didn't push. He didn't try to convince me. Instead, he reached out and gently cupped my hand in his, sending a surge of warmth through me. Hey, he said softly, I'm not here to push you into anything you're not ready for. But just so you know, he paused, and there was a flicker of something dark in his eyes. If you ever change your mind, I'll be here. That was it. That one moment. It was all I needed to hear. He didn't beg. He didn't insist. He simply left the door open, and that was all it took. In some strange way, I knew I couldn't walk away. Not without coming back. I left the cafe feeling more confused than I had ever felt in my life. I was torn between two worlds, two desires. On one side, there was David, the steady, reliable man who loved me unconditionally. On the other, there was Mark, the thrill, the excitement, the raw pull of something new, something I hadn't experienced before. When I got home that night, I tried to push it all aside. David was sitting on the couch, working on his laptop. He barely looked up when I walked in. But I couldn't help but notice the way he seemed so comfortable, so at ease with everything. I couldn't help but feel the weight of my secret pressing down on me. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal, trying to act like nothing had changed. How was your day? It was fine, David replied, looking up with a small smile. How about you? I paused. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with thoughts of Mark, of what had almost happened. I was standing in front of the man I had vowed to be loyal to, the man I had promised myself I'd never hurt. And yet here I was, holding onto a secret that was slowly eating away at me. It was good, I said, my voice tight. I forced a smile, but inside, I felt like I was suffocating. David didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but he didn't question me. He never did. He trusted me. He trusted us. And that trust, it felt like a weight now. It felt like a lie I was carrying with every step I took. That night, as I lay in bed next to him, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Mark, about how he made me feel alive, how he made me feel like I mattered. I thought about the way he had looked at me, the way his hands had felt on mine. I wondered what would have happened if I had let it go farther. And then I thought about David, about his warmth, his steady presence, his unwavering love for me. I thought about the life we had built, about the promises we'd made to each other. But still, the question remained, does size really matter? I couldn't stop asking it. I couldn't stop wondering if there was something more out there. And that question, so simple, yet so powerful, was beginning to pull me away from everything I had ever known. If you've ever felt the pull between loyalty and temptation, between what you have and what you want, then you know how hard it is to make a choice. What will I do next? What will happen when the truth finally comes out? Make sure to like and subscribe to follow my journey as I navigate the choices I've made, and the consequences that are sure to follow. I wish I could say that after everything. The cafe, the flirting, the long nights spent tossing and turning with guilt, I made the right choice. That I took a step back, remembered who I was, and chose loyalty over the pull of temptation. But if I'm being honest with you, I didn't. The weeks that followed were filled with a sense of confusion and urgency that I couldn't shake. I kept telling myself I was just curious, that it was just a fleeting fantasy. But every day, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. Every night, I would lie next to David, feeling the weight of my secret pressing against me. It was the hardest thing to keep from him, but I didn't want to lose David. I didn't want to be the woman who betrayed the man who had always treated me with such kindness. He didn't deserve any of this. Yet, the more I fought the urge, the more it pulled at me. Every time Mark would text, every time I would think about the way he made me feel, like I was seen, like I was wanted, it felt like an addiction I couldn't break. And then came the night I finally made the choice. David had to work late again. He wasn't coming home until midnight, and I knew it. The house was quiet, and the loneliness I'd been feeling for weeks seemed to echo in the emptiness. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know. I needed to find out if all these whispers, all these promises of better, of something more, were true. I grabbed my phone. I stared at Mark's number for a few seconds, feeling my heart race in anticipation and fear. I hesitated for a moment, just a moment, but then the message was sent. I invited him over. It was sudden, impulsive, and reckless, but it felt right in that moment. He replied almost immediately, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. I didn't have time to rethink it. My pulse was pounding in my ears as I paced the house, trying to calm myself. I told myself it was just for one night, just to know, just to get rid of the curiosity. It was a one-time thing. It wouldn't change anything, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. I spent the next half hour trying to prepare myself, even though nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. I wasn't just stepping out of my marriage. I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. When the doorbell rang, my heart nearly stopped. I opened the door, and there he was, Mark, standing on the other side. His smile was confident, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes too. I invited him in, my hands shaking, my thoughts racing. This was real now. There was no going back. We didn't waste time with small talk. We both knew why we were here. And as soon as the door closed behind us, the tension between us was palpable. I felt an electric pull that I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, primal. Something about the moment made me feel alive in a way I hadn't known I could. We kissed, and it was nothing like I had experienced with David. It was wild, urgent, almost desperate, like we both needed something we couldn't get from anywhere else. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. As the night unfolded, I could feel myself losing control. The guilt, the shame, it all melted away in the heat of the moment. It didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the now, the excitement, the thrill of something forbidden. The hours passed in a blur. When it was over, when Mark left, I was left standing there, alone in the silence of the house. The reality of what I had just done hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt empty. I felt dirty. And the guilt came crashing over me, 10 times worse than I had imagined. But I couldn't deny it. I had crossed a line. David came home later that night, just as he always did. He kissed me on the forehead, wrapped his arms around me, and told me he loved me. I felt like a stranger in my own body. The weight of what I had done felt unbearable, and yet I was trying to act like nothing had changed. It was an illusion. I knew that. It couldn't last. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was living in a nightmare. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I hesitated before reaching for it. It was a message from Mark. "Had a great time last night. Don't forget me." I stared at the message, feeling the guilt flood back in waves. I had to stop. I knew that. I couldn't keep doing this to myself, to David, to us. But then I thought about the way I felt when I was with Mark. I thought about the excitement, the raw desire, the way I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. It was a feeling I couldn't ignore. And as much as I wanted to convince myself that I could walk away from it, I knew deep down that I was caught in a trap of my own making. David didn't know. He couldn't know. He trusted me, and I had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I had made my choice. And now I had to live with the consequences. It had been days, maybe even weeks, since that night with Mark, and the guilt had only grown heavier. It hung over me like a dark cloud, suffocating me in the silence between David and me. I couldn't look him in the eye without seeing the lie between us. The man who loved me unconditionally, who had stood by me through everything, deserved the truth. I couldn't live with this secret anymore. It was eating me alive. The weight of it, the betrayal, the shame, it was all too much. And I knew that if I didn't tell him, I would lose the one thing that mattered more than any fleeting thrill: my marriage. David had no idea what was coming. We were sitting at the kitchen table one evening, him scrolling through his phone, me just staring at my coffee cup, lost in my thoughts. I hadn't said anything to him in days, not really. The conversation felt empty, but tonight was different. "David," I said, my voice shaky, trembling with the words I had been holding back for so long. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been hiding." He looked up at me, confusion crossing his face. He had no idea. "I've made a mistake," I continued, my hands shaking in my lap. "A terrible mistake. I don't know why I did it. I was wrong, and I need you to know the truth." His expression softened, and I could see the concern in his eyes. "What's going on, love? What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage I had left. "I've been unfaithful," I said, the words heavy and cold on my tongue. "I've betrayed you. I had an affair. It was with someone I met. I don't even know why it happened. But I need you to know, it meant nothing compared to you. You're the one I love, David. But I messed up." The silence between us felt deafening. David sat there, looking at me as though he couldn't quite process what I had just said. I had broken him. "Why?" he asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Why would you do that? After everything?" I don't know," I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. "I let the lies, the whispers, get to me. I let curiosity get the best of me. But nothing could ever compare to what we have. It was a mistake, and I am so sorry." David's face was unreadable, and for a moment I thought I had lost him forever. My heart shattered at the thought. But then, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. "I don't know how to feel right now," he said, his voice distant. "But I can't just give up on us. I want to understand. I want to know why. But we'll have to work through this together." I nodded, relief flooding through me. I had confessed. I had come clean. It wasn't the end of us. Maybe it was the beginning of something harder, something that would take time. But it was a step forward. David reached across the table, taking my hand in his. "This is going to hurt, but I'm willing to try if you are." "I am," I said, my voice filled with tears. "I want us to work. I want us to heal. I will do whatever it takes to make it right." And so, we started the long, difficult journey of rebuilding our marriage. There were tough days, conversations we didn't want to have, trust we had to slowly rebuild. But we were in it together. David was willing to fight for us, and so was I. We would face this mistake, face the consequences, but we wouldn't let it define us. I had betrayed him, but I was determined to show him that I could be the woman he deserved. We both were. It wasn't easy, but we had each other, and together we would heal.